Hi, I'm Sean Robinson,
I'm Carson Grubaugh.
and with us today is the fantastic cartoonist, the New York Times bestselling cartoonist, author of 12 different books that your children have read and hidden underneath their beds. It is the great Jimmy the Rock Gownley.
That is so funny that you should mention that. That's my dad's nickname. Was my dad Rock?
Really?
Rock, wow.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
He didn't want to mess with Rock Gownley. No.
Where did he get that
Well,
from?
He was a
I
breaker
feel
boy.
imbued. I swear I didn't do any pre-pro here.
The story is he was a breaker boy in the mines when he was 9, and he was on the roof of a barn and it collapsed and he fell on the mule, and he didn't cry, but the mule did, and that's how he got Rock.
That's a damn good story for a nickname.
If you have an autobio collection at some point, other than your comics one, I would suggest that you lead with that story. Just transpose the first names. Make yourself seem as though you've lived for 120
no one would buy
years.
that. No one would buy it.
And let me say thank you so much for making an autobio comic that's like positive and not bitchy. It's like, yes, comics are great. I love making comics. It's not like I'm miserable and I'm stuck in my room. And I love that. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. I read so many different memoirs, and I from the higher end stuff all the way down, and it always seemed like I am the lone sensitive soul in this world full of idiots. And I thought, we can't do that. No one's buying that.
It was so well, a ton of people buy it for some reason, but it was so refreshing. And then also, I told Jimmy in email already, but since Sean's talking about kids hiding it under their beds, I was just recommending Jimmy's Amelia Rules series to my one of my two best friends. His daughter's like all of a sudden really wants to be a graphic novelist, and I said, get those. And he came back and he said, I asked her, and she checks them out all the time from the library. And I sent Jimmy some of her cartoons. So
she's pretty good, I gotta say. Pretty good. Gotta watch her back.
Influencing the new generation in a really great way.
And Jimmy, what's your latest book?
My latest book, I happen to have a copy of it right here.
Yeah.
It is 7 Good Reasons Not to Grow Up. It's from Scholastic, and it's a nice thick this is one that you will hide from your parents, or good parents will give to their kids knowing that they will feel that they should hide it. So
right.
It's a lot of Mad magazine and a lot of Cerebus influence in it, so all that kind of good stuff.
Fantastic.
That one's at the end of the stack that I'm still working through of the Amelia Rules ones I haven't read, and I'm saving that one because I know I'm really looking forward to that one.
Pretty proud of it. Took I think 400 years to draw, but it's done now, and that's great.
And made it to press, and made it into hands, and everything is rolling now. That's fantastic. And I've seen some photos of you. You were working on a new book right now, right? You're in process.
Yeah, I'm working on about 3 different things. I do a lot of work for Disney when I'm not drawing my stuff, so I just do a lot of writing stuff. And I'm actually working on another Amelia story. Hopefully that'll be out and people will be able to see that before too long. So that's probably my number one thing. And then I have two other projects that are still in the early stages.
Gotcha.
So we'll see.
Fantastic. And so somebody tell me what it is that we're actually going to be looking at today, because I haven't read it. I seem to have forgotten, so I need a refresher. What is it that you have brought for us today, Jimmy?
Love and Rockets, The Death of Speedy by Jaime Hernandez. 1986, 87, one of the greatest comic stories ever written.
And that collection that you have right there is the original collected Fantagraphics edition.
Yes.
And that just includes the 4 stories there, or also has some of the other stories that take place in the same environment?
Yeah, no, it does go on. It does the Jerusalem Cricket story with Hopi and her band on tour, and
right.
then a wrestling story as well. But what I wanted to talk about today was just the actual Death of Speedy story itself, which is shockingly only 59 pages. It feels like an epic, but he's just so economical. 59 pages in and out.
Where did you first encounter it?
The first thing I saw anything about Love and Rockets was in a magazine that came out called, I think it was called Comics Feature.
Okay.
Or possibly Comics Scene. There were two magazines that came out around the same time. And I get the titles confused. But there was just an ad about our black and white, or not an ad, an article about black and white comics and are they good investments? And, I was 12, like, what are they? But yeah, they showed some of Jaime's work. It was the cover where it's like a circle and then sliced out little portraits of all the other characters. And it just looked like the most modern, hip thing I'd ever seen. But I didn't live anywhere near a comic book store. So it was like 2 years before I was able to get to a comic book store. And I bought, I think issue 27 or 28 was the one that was on the stands at the time, which is from this storyline. And, that along with Cerebus were the two big comic books from that time period that just made me realize this is everything I want to do with my whole life.
Yeah, it seems like you've got some visual influence from Jaime's work in terms of like the stylization and the line work, or would you not say?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, he's like Mozart, and I'm like a guy who has Mozart on 8-track, but yeah, okay, sure, Yeah, I mean, I'll show you. Actually, there's one panel that I still try to regularly do homages of. We'll call them homages. And I did an homage in the latest book, so we'll see how I stack up.
Nice.
Spoiler alert, not too good.
John,
Yeah,
where did you first encounter? I'm curious about, because I think Love and Rockets is a book that you remember your first encounter really clearly. So I'm curious what yours is.
Well, it's a little weird. I mean, I had heard about it so much, and part of that was just sort of the Gary Groth interview machine. If you've read, I don't know, 12 issues of the Comics Journal from the 80s, you've read Gary Groth talking about the Hernandez brothers in interviews with unrelated cartoonists, at least 24 times. So I had seen a lot of mentions. I'd seen a lot of in-house ads, and I must have had like exposure in that kind of way, I don't know, for years before I actually read an issue of Love and Rockets. When I actually got it, it was encountering the series that Jimmy has there at Seattle Library Sales. And so I lived in Seattle for a long time, and they had these massive sales where the library basically gets rid of any books that have been donated that they didn't sell at their Friends of the Library shop, or they'll get rid of low circulating things and stuff like that. And oftentimes you can pick up, 50 cents a pop, you can pick up a whole stack. And so I picked up a whole stack of the Love and Rockets collections. And I have to say, at the time, it was intimidating to read because of the interconnectedness of the different stories, and getting to kind of dip into them out of sequence. I found Jaime's stories to be a little bit less penetrable in a sort of dipping in kind of way, whereas the Guibert, is that his name? Gilbert?
I say Gilbert. I'm assuming there's better ways to pronounce it, but I found like the Palomar stories are a little bit more, even though they're obviously related in a similar kind of way to each other, they're a little bit more easy to sort of dip in and out of. At least that's the way that I found it. And I also found his stylization to be really engaging from a visual standpoint. So I think that those were the ones that were sort of, made a bigger impression on me at the time. But coming back to this, which I had read this, we're talking 14 years ago. Coming back to it now, it was just super engaging, and I found that I could follow the things a lot more. Part of it was just, actually reading an entire chunk in sequence and everything like that. But yeah, that's my sort of like, I would be the odd man out of this conversation in the sense of being a little bit more outside.
Gilbert tells his stories dip in, dip out of sequence and stuff, which is one of the things that's interesting about his stories. You're like watching a movie that this character's acting in, and so you can do that.
Yeah.
Jaime is much more linear, I think. So
right, and I think that the linear structure and the fact that all the characters are interconnected and things like that are one of those things, very similar to Cerebus in a certain kind of way, that work for the work as a whole, but work against it as an accessible thing that you're gonna like kind of, here, read this thing right now, just this thing, just this part of this thing. It's a little bit less of a sort of, like if you read all of the Locust stories, we'll talk about the different ways they've been collected, but here's the 2004 edition that has all of the Locust stories up to that point. So this is all the stories with Maggie and Hopi together. And if you were to just, sit down and read this at first, at first you think it's a science fiction comic. And then you think it's, it shifts genres, it shifts, there's all these different things that you have to remember from the earlier points where it was significantly different. I think the barrier to entry is higher than some of the other things, but it's also the thing that keeps you coming back and keeps you like engaged throughout. You get to see these characters interconnect, and you get to see them age. And spoiler alert, based on the title of what we're going to be looking at today, you get to see him die.
I was still shocked by that in 1987, even though that's the title. I was still like, "Oh my God, Speedy died!" I can't believe it.
Are we allowed to talk about this? Yeah. If you haven't read this story, go out and take an hour, get a copy of Girl from Hoppers, and read the section we're talking about, and then come back. But we're gonna talk about it all the way to the end. So
yeah, for sure. Okay, we're ready to start flipping through the book.
Yeah. So Jimmy, what do you think about him leading with that title? You got this sort of omen hanging over the entire thing.
Yeah, and it comes up in the title, that kind of Eisner-esque title treatment through the thing where it's like on a fence behind her and stuff like that. So it is sort of hovering over it. It's a little like Return of the King, though, in that it gives away the ending. But but that's kind of brilliant, because when you get there, it still is a punch in the stomach. It just still takes all the wind out of you. You're like, oh my God. So yeah, if you can, I think you're working at the top of your game if you can give away the ending and still have the ending have that kind of wallop when you get there. That's impressive.
You got a lot of these relationships encapsulated in this first panel here. There's the gentleman in question. So, hey, Maggie, when's your sister coming for another visit? How should I know? You talk to her more than I do, Speedy. You've got her turning away, like looking down, disapproving. And, even from the distance that we're at, you can read his expression. You can see his hand in his pocket, beer in the other hand, leaning right against the car, all of the body language signals open and hers all closed off. And then the gentleman in the background observing them from afar.
With very interested in what's going on there.
Well, first thing that's just blown me away is that the original collection that I have from '87 actually starts with the story from the previous issue, The Return of Ray D, which actually sets up some characters that end up being important, like Ray Dominguez, and also has a flashback to Maggie and Hopi's first kiss.
Right.
Which is one of the great, that as a 15-year-old Catholic schoolboy, I thought that was the greatest scene in comics. Well, I'll read this for the rest of my life. Thank you very much.
This right here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Punk rock. You always know you're in for a good story when Hopi has that little mohawk, stuff's going down.
Yeah, for sure. That's like the height of like what I think about as like the charm of the Locust stories is the two punk rock girls.
Yeah.
And well observed. That stuff is not, these are not made up, invented details. Having been in a few bands myself of this vein, let's say, these are both extraordinarily accurate and also sort of untrammeled paths in terms of like fictional stuff. I don't know if it's just because people who are into that type of music don't typically know how to write, or I don't know what. But
Jimmy, you play music too, right?
That's a joke, by the way.
Oh well,
I'm not saying anyone who likes punk rock music can't write. I'm making a.
It's an insult to music to say what I do is playing music, but yeah, I play guitar and I amateurly write songs and stuff like that. Yeah.
But like I was in a band in high school, so I think that there's that connection for all of us to, this stuff. Yeah, like I was in not a punk, but most of the guys in my band were into punk. I was more like metal, you know, so I was a little resistant to the punk, but we played a lot of shows with local punk bands and stuff. So I mean, not like LA punk like this, but it is all very familiar. The scene
And
and attitude.
these strips make that LA punk scene like one of the best documented scenes in America. You know, there's no work of art like this about Athens or Seattle or something like that, really. It's amazing. And it was done in real time, you know. But here's something else just before we go through the whole thing. You know, Maggie was 18, the character, when I started reading this, 18 or 19, and I was 15. She lived her life along, like we've lived alongside each other. It's the only time it will ever happen is that first generation who read it when it was coming out. But that's like an amazing gift, is that there's this other person living alongside you all these years.
That happened to me with the comic strip For Better or For Worse. Like I was the same age as the kids growing up. Right. And man, that really lands. This stuff I had first encountered it in the library when I was 15 or 16, and I was like, oh, I shouldn't be. I was with Everett Glenn up in the library, like, oh, I shouldn't be looking at this. And the weird sci-fi stuff and the surrealism of the first, because I was like, well, you got to start with number one, and that first original collection is so bizarre. So I didn't grow up with the characters. I came back to it older as like, well, this is something you're supposed to read if you're into comics. So unfortunately I missed out on that, but I would have been the right age. Yeah.
That fantastic silhouette there on the right-hand page, and you know, economically setting up the character relationships here. I mean, just like Speedy and then Ray, like you said. It's great that the Ray introduction story is actually collected right before that.
But even without that, because I've read these once, honestly, like I haven't gone back to them. I'm a like forward momentum guy, always reading something new. But like you can just look at him and see, man, he's really interested in what's going on there, and he continues to be interested throughout. And his use of blacks, I think when I look at Jaime Hernandez's work, even the fact that I think he might have been one of the first people I was really aware of, the fact that he doesn't separate things. He'll let the black bleed. Like when you grow up reading like Image comics, they always put a white line to separate people's hair from the background. And that had a huge impact on me. I remember that. And it's still, when I look at it, is just impressive.
Yeah, he just knows what details to leave out, which is amazing. You know, I mean, sometimes he'll draw those profiles and you won't see where the nose and the mouth connect, or you won't see the outline or where black fades into black, like you're saying. It's just masterful drawing. One thing I'm looking at that's surprising me too about these two collections is they did not make an attempt to keep the page turns. So, you know, meaning like, you know, what you're seeing on the left-hand page there is actually on my right-hand page, which later on would be an issue because he does care about page turns. But I guess at this point, he was just working page to page and not really thinking about the page turn, which I'm surprised by.
Also, it's in the different reproductions. This would have been like here.
Yeah.
That could really upset some of your surprises you have coming.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I would bet that those first ones that you've got, Jimmy, are the sort of more economical, like, you know, just take the pages and lay them out exactly as they fit. And these later collections are probably the ones that are considering the pagination a little bit more.
Yeah, I guess I don't have the original issue, so I'm not sure, but yeah, probably.
Because since the original book is what do you call it? It's a collection of stories. The pagination might be totally different if you take out some of the puzzle pieces or whatever.
Yeah, if this was page one, it would be fine. But if there was a Gilbert story that ended on an odd page, then this would be, yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. That does cause problem for recollection.
Yeah, I never thought about it till right now.
On the third page, that first panel of Esther walking away is the hair flip. with the jaunty leg out and the chest thrust. That's just fantastic. That's like prime.
That's where Archie. That's where you see his interest in the Archie stuff for sure.
Totally. This really does, like, it's funny that Carson, you and I and Brandon were joking about the Archie and what would it be like to take a Dan DeCarlo style and like lavishly recreate it for some other kind of purpose. It's there's a little bit of that here because of how much that influence.
Yeah, we failed to go. Oh yeah, Love and Rockets.
Right, exactly right.
But I can tell you that Dan Parent did, at least when I was at Kubert School, he did porno comics in the Archie style. So I don't think that was any secret.
It's not now.
No, they were like people like having sex with aliens and stuff, but it looked like an Archie book. Anyways,
speaking of sex,
yeah. Speaking of sex,
we have the restaurant sex. We get an idea of Speedy as a person who is living up to his reputation, his name, that is.
One panel, and this is a great example of why we're wrong to throw out parts of the comics language, because this is two separate thought balloons, which is considered hacky and tacky these days. I think DC Comics actually banned thought balloons for years. I don't know if they still have. But that's a magic thing that comics can do. And I don't understand the resistance to using them when you can, you can take something that would have to be done in multiple panels or in some awkward way. And it's one drawing and it works perfectly.
And this is what on the reread I did blew me away about this story is the really quick jumps as he's following these characters around. Like, this is Maggie and Esther at home and talking about her car and stuff, and then it jumps to Speedy banging the waitress and then jumps to Ray. So this is like, you really have to mentally be linking that all the way back to like here, but I never felt lost. And normally I would be like, this is a mess of storytelling. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Each of those guys are totally distinct from each other facially, and quite remarkable, the likenesses being maintained through the character design.
And such minimal lines on those faces. Right. I mean, it's amazing. It's dots and dashes, but you would never confuse one of the characters and they all have similar hair colors. There's no color to differentiate. Right. Like Superman will always be the guy in the blue and red, right? So, but this has none of that, and you're never ever confused. Later on, he'll go and he'll switch. Like I could never, or very rarely, am able to change scenes in a page. I can count maybe on one hand the number of times I've done it, like he just did. But in later issues, 11 Rockets, he'll jump back decades in the middle of a page and not tell you, and it works. So you have to be alert, but it works.
He doesn't give you the elsewhere, meanwhile.
No,
like none of that. Like, it happens again here. You just ride with these guys the whole time. You're with Ray and his homies, and then all of a sudden you're back to the restaurant.
This pull up of the car right at the top of that previous page, Carson, is another one of those examples where we've got like essentially like a few lines, teeny tiny lines, doing the body language work there, all the way down to those guys' heads being shattered in. I mean, that is, I've just seen this, in my life so many times, and he's communicated that so well.
Yeah, you can just hear the guys like, "Hey, Holmes," like
that arm.
I grew up in the Central Valley of California in the 90s. Like, I was exposed to that.
That arm ready for action.
I have a really interesting a car thing to when we get a little further on. Or wait, you know what? Oh, I think it might have been in the earlier. Oh no, we'll just keep going. Forget I said anything. All right, go ahead.
We're back in the restaurant all of a sudden. This I love right here. Like, the dogs are talking all of a sudden, so he can jump into like kind of nonsense too, and it fits this totally realistic world.
I love that type of thing. I guess, if you're highfalutin, you call magical realism, but again, is also just cartooning. I mean, that's Garfield or Peanuts or something like that. But he just elevates such a stupid idea.
Wait,
And only uses it this one time, I think, in the entire like 1,000+ pages of Locus. But
Yeah,
it's great.
You have a few departures along those lines in your new book, Jimmy. Actually, I thought were awesome.
It baffles people these days, though. They're like,
Right.
Does the guy not have feet? Why is he floating? It doesn't matter. It's not.
Yeah, but like points of contention for people sometimes, if in like a, let's say, editorial capacity, where somebody who's reading it might have some kind of like feedback where they don't have the same, like, I don't know, forgiveness of the moment. I mean, I wonder if a panel like this will get published under a strict editorial.
You would have to fight for it. You would have to argue for it, and it ultimately would not be worth it. So you just gotta forget it.
Say Tezuka, damn it. Like,
yeah,
if he can do it, we can do it.
And they'd say who?
Yeah.
And then we actually have Esther coming up to Speedy.
And the cycling of the different characters interacting with each other kind of separately, like tracking, they're like in these circles. There's like 3 or 4 circles that are like in and out of each other's orbits in all these shifting panels. I think feels really natural to me when it makes sense. Like when you're watching TV, that happens all the time. You jump back and forth and you don't get a meanwhile elsewhere,
Right.
But in comics, it's just like you got to always assume people won't get it or something. So
well, that's
that's
that. Maybe some of the conventional wisdom anyway, whether or not it's actually true. But yeah, so Maggie lives with the wrestler, female wrestler, and it turns out that Maggie's sister is not actually had permission to borrow the car. And the car has been reported stolen.
This scene, I'll admit, the jump messed me up a little bit because she's all of a sudden in new clothes. And then Maggie has a nickname, Perla, that her like family calls her. So that threw me off. Like, even though I know that it looks like a different, because the clothes are a lot of how he'll identify the characters, the striped shirt and that kind of stuff. So she's all of a sudden wearing like a jacket and they're calling her Perla. It took me a second to go, but then she takes the jacket off and she's still got the black tank top. So that was the one time.
Like an old Russian novel, like Brothers Karamazov. It's like Alyoshy and Alexei, and that's Lexi, and it's all the same guy. Yeah, there is a little bit of that to that with her Perla and Perlita and the magpie, but it just adds to that richness and reality of it, which is amazing. I never even think to give my character multiple nicknames.
Yeah, you were talking about television, Carson. Throughout this whole sequence that we've looked at so far, a note that most of the eye level, with a few exceptions, is ground level to the characters. It does, he varies the view, he varies the amount that we're zooming in on them or whatever, but it does feel a little bit more like a sort of like 3 camera setup kind of visual situation, because I think probably because he lets the acting do a lot of the work. Somebody who's going to pull out extreme angles all the time might not have the same, obviously he's got the chops for making the body language do the work for in terms of the acting. It doesn't necessarily feel the need to pull out or do these extreme angles or anything like that.
So then you get a shot like that and it's like, just out of nowhere, composition like that.
Yeah, it's
great. Not a change in angle so much, but that break of that almost stage play. It makes me think of like Leonard Starr too.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Like that stage play type of layout, but it never gets boring because each composition's just as solid as can be.
You guys think that Jaime had a copy of that Wally Wood, Larry Hama panels that always work?
22 panels always work.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure that was around in the fanzines, right? So I'm sure he would have seen something like that.
It feels like he's composing along really classical lines. Always.
Yeah. Yeah, and he gives credit to this like one art teacher at a community art college that like unlocked all this in him.
Wow.
And because we're looking at a guy that's in his early 20s still, right? Or mid 20s. Right. I mean, I think he started Love and Rockets when he was 19. It's insane.
That puts a lot of pressure on me, Jimmy. Thanks. As a community college instructor.
I love the speedy approach here, the jaunty legs forward, arms swinging, all of a sudden feeling good because he's
that's pure Archie comics there. Yeah.
Right.
And then this next, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say he needs the pointed crown on the top.
Yeah. And this next panel, they say, he says, here, suck on this. How about you, Ray? Grab one. And they hand him a beer, but he's also got it like lined up right with his crotch. So it's like, here, suck on this. Like, I don't know how intentional that was, or instinctive, or just happenstance, but that even little details like that seem to reinforce, the kind of guys joking around, talking about dicks and suck on this, and
very naturalistic dialogue. It always rings true to me.
Yeah.
And I think it's partly because it's not just the dialogue, it's the dialogue in conjunction with the drawing and the body language and the composition.
And then we get Ray drunk on the next page.
Oh, that's so great.
Great body language right there. The arms go in the wrong direction of the legs.
And for someone who has such clean kind of static lines, I would say, like if you just look at the lines, they're very austere. Mm-hmm. And the compositions are so classic that they could be a little bit static, but it never is. Like, they always have forward motion in terms of storytelling, and just those couple speed lines really make it move still, which is impressive to me.
I was thinking about,
I think there was, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just thinking, it's something about the way he's using these things that are, considered, well, I mean, they're cartooning, but they're usually used in things that are lightweight, right? Like Archie and Harvey comics and stuff like that, or whatever. But he's dealing with subject matter that's so much more sophisticated than the things that were even being passed off as sophisticated in mainstream comics at the time. There's something about that, the discrepancy between those, the way the visuals are and what the subject matter is, that also made it super hip, just really, really hip at the time, and still is hip.
I was wondering about the sort of static line, and we were talking before camera, before we recorded a little bit about the densities, how we basically only got white, black, and then a sort of like 40% hatching that happens periodically. I was wondering if there's an influence from punk rock posters, like Raymond Pettibone, and a lot of the those associated bands, that might be a visual influence as well.
Well, Pettibone for sure, because he based the cover of Love and Rockets #1 off one of his flyers.
He did.
Yeah,
really?
I'm not sure.
Now that I'm saying this out loud, that's good.
I feel like I'm wrong, but I don't think I'm wrong. I think that's right. Yes.
Wow. Okay.
The one with the girls in front of the police lineup wall. Yeah, it's one of his
interesting
flyers.
Yeah. The Pettibone thing, I wasn't thinking in terms of the drawing necessarily, but almost entirely like the rendering. And if you think about the economics of a style like that, there's a lot of rationales for it. Like you take a Pettibone drawing and you photocopy it a couple times, it still basically maintains fairly well because you're not using a lot of fine lines. You're relying mostly on the placement of the black to do a lot of the work, and then the hatching already being fairly dense but being visually separated from the other elements means that it doesn't really fill in as much. I don't know. I just sort of putting two and two together here.
Yeah, for sure.
And then we're ramping up with the conflict in the background. Obviously, we've got the looming character conflict between Speedy's, interest in various ladies, but we also have the last panel here. Time to put up the bulletproof window screens with the Hoppers gang crossed out and Dairytown Loco, various other things I'm not going to say right now, in response to their tag there. And so we've got this sort of looming other conflict in the back. And Vida Loca, in case you guys have never heard Mr. Martin's classic song, means Le Crazy Life.
And here's where you're talking about they've got the subtitle to that. So I think we all call it The Death of Speedy Ortiz, but it's Vida Loca, and then that's like the subtitle, right? And then you were talking about this earlier where he has that, like, just giving away the ending, but it's written on the wall. Like, I mean, literally, it's the writing on the wall.
Yeah, really. Yeah, I love that. I just love that. It's just a comic thing. If that was in a movie, it would be corny or, you know, draw such attention to itself. But it just really works here. And that the mood in that drawing. And you could also see, this is where you still see a little bit of the remnant of like his Mobius stuff up in the tree. And yeah, which he's pretty much weaned the early Love and Rocket stuff is you know, rife with that, but he's pretty much weaned himself off it by this point. But it still shows up here and again. This was the first issue I ever bought, this one.
Oh, okay. So what's it like to look at it again?
It glows like with a magical mysticism that you know, like the other ones will always be great and I love them all, but somehow this one, just all of the magic kind of comes back when I look at it. Like that second panel where she's just looking because she stepped on something in her bare feet. I mean, I've never seen that in a comic. No one's observed such a little detail.
And it doesn't matter to anything else either. It's just,
no, right.
It adds the feeling of like observed, and then you just move on.
Yeah. And it's so minimal. It doesn't have anything to do. It's not advancing the story other than kind of him noticing her. But yet the story is rapid fire. I mean, you know, it's well, as long as a Batman annual.
But in terms of him noticing her, it's like you could draw a guy noticing a girl walking down the street, but catching her in that vulnerable moment with her shoes off and she's like craning her neck, and it, like, the pose is very cute unintentionally, so like you just load that moment in a way that's so much more interesting than like, oh, there's a hot girl walking down the street. Like you catch, I don't know, like those are the kinds of things that would make me notice a girl. Like there's hot girls all over the place, but you got to catch the one in that moment where you feel like you're seeing her, you know, like that's what that is. It's such a romantic.
Yeah. And none of the signifiers that a cartoonist would use for a hot girl exist in Maggie, but she's the most beautiful person, you know. It's just amazing. And I love, and you know, you could see the background is so detailed, well, for Jaime in those two panels, but as soon as he notices her in that next panel, it's gone. There's nothing. It's just her. Yeah.
And his car. Those are the two.
Well, sure, that's right. The two things that are most important to these guys, right?
Yeah.
The little small technical note, that up and down patchy hatching is something that Gilbert just runs with in the Palomar stories. That basically becomes the rendering technique that he uses. And it's got a nice flattening effect. It gives you like a, you know, proscenium stage kind of like you know, because it flattens each of the planes that it's on. It gives you the feeling of like a stagecraft, kind of like I put up a flat here and then there's another flat that you can see past there, kind of feeling to it.
And you know, it's strange too, like Gilbert and Jaime are so different in so many ways, but they also, you know, it's important to say they each had their own stories in each of these magazines, and they somehow, it just sung when you would read the two stories together, even though they had nothing to do with each other. It gave it this sort of, the two of them had this sort of resonance that, and this is 1986. This is the Watchmen Dark Knight year. Cerebus is doing Church and State, like, right? It's all great stuff. And in Death of Speedy was happening at the same time as Human Diastrophism, which is the Gilbert story, which is one of his massive peaks as well. All of that was under one comic book. It's for like $1.50. It's crazy.
I almost feel like they're so dense that, like, when I read any Los Bros stuff, I need breaks. It's hard to power through it all almost, and I feel like flipping back and forth between them gives me a break from each one. I don't know that I could go and like read this whole book all the way through, or like, do you have that like whole Locust book, Sean?
Right.
Oof. Like, I don't know.
There's some physical issues with reading a book this size.
Yeah, I bought that at the San Diego Comic-Con years ago and thought, why am I'm going to fly with this now? Oh, brother.
Yeah.
It's not the complete Locust.
Right.
It doesn't have the first story in it.
Right.
Which is insane.
The TSA is going to take that away from you because they know that could be used to incapacitate any pilot.
It's definitely a weapon.
Yeah. So then we've got our boys are driving up again, and don't worry, Ray, we'll get you back to your little princess all intact.
So charming. And by the way, for something that's so much about cars and the lowrider cultures, his cars are not real cars.
No.
They're just
no.
They're just made up.
Amalgamations. Yeah.
This panel though.
Oh. Okay. All right. Well, we have to talk for 5 hours about that panel.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
go ahead. Say what you were going to say.
fantastic.
I just like, holy shit. And like this one, and there's one other one that I put a note on. We'll just wait till we get there. The like couple single white lines and everything else black, and the cars just boom, they sing. Like, it's so good.
So brilliant. So yeah, so this was in that first issue I bought, and this was immediately after this magic trip to the comics shop. I started writing and publishing my own comics, and in like the tradition of all great cartoonists, it contained more than a few swipes, right? So one of them was that panel, and the reason for that was because we used to hang out in this town called, it's Shenandoah, but we called it Chendo. And that's what it looked like. That's not a little bit what a Saturday night in Shenandoah looked like. That is exactly, in my mind, what a Saturday night in Shenandoah looked like.
Well,
when I ripped it off and put it in my comic, every kid that bought that comic looked at that panel and went, oh, that's Shenandoah. Knew it immediately, even though it was not. The tragedy and the bitter irony of all of this is that years later, there was actually a documentary made about this town, and the terrible fights that ended up in murder between the Mexican immigrants and the crusty old white people that lived there previous to this, because there was just nothing they could see in these immigrants that reflected them at all. But when I just recontextualized, I ripped that drawing off, they looked at it and said, oh, that's us. Yeah. So that, and I wish they would have been able to read Love and Rockets.
Well, and I grew up in Modesto, California, which is where George Lucas grew up. And the American Graffiti was about the car scene in Modesto, and Rumble Road was the road that my high school was on. And so every summer there is the graffiti nights, and that's a thing in the like 1 week in the summer is graffiti, and people from all over the country, all over the world come with their classic cars, and they cruise up and down McHenry. And this is what McHenry looks like too. Yeah. And that's what we did as kids too. We were bored, we just go jump in the van and cruise up and down McHenry. And like, a bunch of dorky kids in like their mom's van, and you're like driving up next to this girl, and you're like, look at the hot girl, she's gonna pay, it's. And the other thing that he captures in this panel that's so good, and I don't know, maybe it's just the clothes they're wearing or something, but the tangibility of a summer night.
Yes.
There's some thing, at least in Modesto, where it's like 80 degrees, but it's not hot anymore, and it's not a smell, but it's an olfactory like touch in your nose of a summer night. And like these guys are still out there, looking cool, but the girls, it's obviously a warm night.
Yeah.
I don't know, I can feel it in my nose looking at that panel.
You guys think that panel took as much time as the rest of the 2-page spread?
Probably, right? The other thing about this is he draws these pages out of order. And within the pages out of order, he'll leave a tier or a panel or something that's like, we were talking about that panel where that was just like the composition of the telephone poles and stuff earlier.
Right.
that may have just been a blank panel for the longest time until he found that like magic moment. So I do this, and I didn't know he did it this way. So for years I was ashamed that I did it this way, and now I just think I'm a genius too. So it's fine.
You are. And by the way, the book that you're talking about, you went and started publishing your own book. That's the one that you document in the dumbest idea ever.
Yes.
And was this because in that book your friend says, well, why don't you just talk about us? And you're like, that's a stupid idea, like we should be doing something exciting. Did Encountering Love and Rockets say, oh, you can just tell a story about, was that like a part of how you said, okay, we'll do that idea?
Yes, because the actual, I went to this comic store and because literally it was like this magic thing. I couldn't believe a comic book store even existed in the world, let alone one that I could go to, even though it was over an hour away. And I got things like I got Cerebus. I mean, that was the big one that I got there. I got some Elf Quest. I got American Flag, The Rocketeer. I got a bunch of stuff, all of which was hugely influential stuff that I absolutely loved.
Jesus, all at once.
Yeah, in one trip. But then we went on a field trip to Philadelphia, and that's where I got Love and Rockets. And in between those two trips to a comic book shop is when my friend said, you should do a comic book about us. And then I saw this and was like, oh, it's not as stupid, you know?
But
and the book, I focused more on Cerebus because it was more about the story in that was more about the self-publishing, you know?
Right.
But yeah, this was definitely a blueprint where I was able to go, well, yeah, I mean, this changed everything for me.
And that drawing in the dumbest idea ever of you walking into the comic shop is like, yeah, you can see just like the heaven in that drawing really nails that feeling of the first comic shop ever.
Yeah, well, it's just a magic place, right? You know, I think we're all jaded because now every place in the world, there's a Second and Charles. There's a couple of them around me, and you know, you go in and there's, they're the best. You know, and you go in, there's families reading comics. There's all people from all different types of walks of life, you know, looking at these comics. But back then, it was just you know, closet little thing. There's that comic shop was in a guy's house.
Right.
But the way you draw it is like this expansive Disneyland, which is like what it had to have been in your mind.
Yeah,
so I totally love that.
In reality, it was a row house, but inside of my mind, it was the Emerald City or whatever. It was the moment, and I colored it that way too. Everything is sepia toned and depressed, and then you open up that door, and it's you know, you're in Oz.
Yeah.
We should mention, since we've mentioned both Love and Rockets and Cerebus together in the same breath now a couple times. This is undoubtedly a huge influence on Jaka's Story, which started serializing in 1989, and which you know, Dave Sim is on record as saying was influenced tonally by. I believe he specifically says the Jaime Hernandez stories, but I think that the influence is more than just tonally. You know, Jaka's Story is the first time that he's, you know, he says contemplating a blank canvas. He's looking at, for the first time, a section that he hadn't necessarily had any kind of pre-planning for, after having, you know, done a huge book, Church and State, which, you know, takes up 1,200 pages or whatever. And then he hits this kind of quiet domestic book, which has the same kinds of character dynamics that this story does, where the characters are sort of orbiting around each other, where there are lots of unspoken conflicts as well as the spoken ones, and also which sort of ends in a bang, where all of a sudden these things that were circling each other collide, and the impact point is very significant, even if some of the portions of the story are very quiet. But what I hadn't realized before rereading this is how visually influenced it is too. Jaka's Story is the first time in a long time where he has long shots of fairly static, I keep on calling it camera movement for want of a better word, but your viewpoint is fairly static and the characters are moving within that sort of established field. And that kind of staticness hadn't been with that book for a long period of time. And I've always kind of wondered, you know, where do they get the idea of having this staticness inside of a domestic drama? And I think it's fairly obvious when we're looking at this here.
It's just like this.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You know, and I remember, I don't know where he said this, but I remember Dave saying something like, well, Love and Rockets isn't really my thing, but if it were my thing, what kind of thing would it be? Or something like, which is like the most Dave way to say that. You know?
Yeah.
That panel right there is just fantastic. Yeah, in the blackness, you Speedy, rojo,
Oh, I know.
and
Amazing.
just absolutely killer. All the way down to the cropping the guy's face right up at the nose. And
that second panel where you feel the imposition of these people into his space, but it's just a little bit more black on that panel.
Right. Yep. Yeah. They
And
just
a camera shift, like away from that stagecraft camera that you're talking about. All of a sudden you're looking up. Like that's really different.
Dislocation.
What do you guys think of the way he draws the plaid patterns?
not having it wrap, like having it just be flat. It works given how, that's what I'm saying. His style is so still and flat, but it's also somehow so alive and so much movement and so much depth, which is a real hell of a trick to pull off.
Adrian Tomine has taken that to a logical extreme, I'd say. Like his short story, his first few short story collections have like more stiffness and more of that sort of flat impositions, and more of the staging, and also maybe even more subtle body language, or less expressive body language. Maybe that would be the other way to say it. But yeah, I see the Tomine influence on this page. It's just like super heavy.
Well, he's another guy that can draw like a fiend, and you have to really know how to draw correctly to draw that wrong, right? And have it still work. Because if I did that, it would be like, what are you doing, Jim? Did you have a stroke?
Well, but there's other people. Like the funny thing is I'm used to seeing that where people will cut out like a tone and put that on a shirt and flatten it out, but he like hand draws it.
Yeah.
So I wonder if he had seen some stuff where people were using tones. But yeah, like it's totally should screw this image up.
Yeah, that's got a Golgo 13 kind of look to it right there. It's interesting. We mentioned hand drawn. Of course, all the panels are also hand drawn. It doesn't look like a ruler nary a ruler was injured during the making of this of this comic.
Yeah, that was also hugely influenced. I love the fact that I don't have to mess around with the T-square. Great, fantastic.
You just gotta have a really steady hand, though.
Yes, yeah, you do. Yeah.
Oh, here's the car. This one is so good. That.
Oh yeah, I know.
Just like 1, 2, 3, 4 lines and 6 dots. And that's a car, and there's just enough change in line weight. It's not just the line; it just dips and like. I like. Is that he drew like the outline of it and then filled the black around, or is he drawing in white on top?
A lot of his blacks look like he's got. He'll go through and outline the shape that he's desiring and then fill it in. Once again, very Pettibon, like I've cut this out and placed it there. It doesn't look like it's a big juicy brushstroke. It looks like a triangle that's been filled in,
Yeah.
Which once again, not a knock at all. I'm just observing with interest her Hopi's hair. Or sorry, I said Hopi. Maggie's hair chunks. Those don't look like single brushstroke hair chunks most of the time. Yeah. At least in this stage of the book, they look like pen outlined.
But it works. Like normally that stuff looks clunky and clogged up, but he pulls it off to where it's graceful.
Yeah, them riding around in the car on the bottom there, blacking out the ceiling is another great choice. An example of like it makes it their chariot or whatever. Like it gives it that sort of infinite space that you can have when you're all having they're pursuing somebody. They're like they're having their social experience in their vehicle. It's not like. It would feel claustrophobic if we could actually see the ceiling and see how close it was to them and all those other things.
Yeah, that's amazing lighting being done without cross-hatching in these sequences. It's crazy.
Yeah, I don't. And I think too, the flattening of these guys makes them these more imposing figures, Jimmy. Like, to not have them be so realistic, they become kind of these big imposing monolith of just chunk of,
That's very true. Yeah.
His headband, the folded, all of these things. Like, I've lived in Southern California now for 9 years, and it's interesting how some things have not changed.
It's legit. Yeah.
Yeah.
When did Sin City come out? Because this had to have been,
years later. Sin City, I think, is 90.
because this is a very Sin City cars out in the desert.
Yeah. Frank Miller's car would be 6 feet off the ground, though. But other than that,
but it still moves the same.
Well, look
way.
at that crump panel. It's pure abstraction. But totally works. It's amazing.
Yeah. So this is the start. You start getting a little bit more ominous to me when we have Speedy in his car here, resting with that shadow eating away most of his face, and then we have him. Day has come, and his little cousins or whatever have come to retrieve him, and he looks terrible.
Yeah,
baggy eyes.
We start to get like a little bit more reminders of the title of the work we're reading.
Right.
I like these abstract flowers here too that pop out on the top of her hair and on her hat.
I love the abstract flowers. Yeah. And there she is. She's now the dog and cat commenting off on this drama that for her is going off in the background.
Well, I forget. Can you remind me of this character's name? Because she's
Izzy or
Izzy.
Just...
Yeah, Izzy. Okay. And she's kind of like seen as psychotic, but in this one, she's definitely the seer.
Yeah, and his sister.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Now, all right. So this last panel. This panel I have contemplated for 40 years.
This kick?
Whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because when you read it, again, I believe this is the end of the first issue I bought. It's like a joke. You're right. Like he comes up and he's talking to Speedy. Hey man, were you with your girlfriend last night? And then it's like, he kicks him in the butt and he goes flying out of the panel. As the story progresses, this is like the inciting incident that causes his friends to kind of turn on him.
Right.
Because he's like, oh yeah, you messed up your friend last night. You fought. And I had that confused me because when you see it here, it's played as a joke.
Right.
And then but having, and Jaime will be happy to know, having thought about it for 30 years or whatever, I decided this was the right way to go. It's a good job. He'll be happy to know. Oh, good.
Well, it's another one of those ones where you put like weird cartoon physics onto real world stuff. Like no one goes flying in the air from getting. I've watched enough UFC to know that even the strongest kickers don't send people flying like that. But he still makes it work.
Totally.
And even though it's jokey, it's also implying like it wraps up all in there, like the amount of violence that actually could have been done.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Well, then, and the intensity of the previous scene. I mean, he's going back to the restaurant. What he's going back for is he's going back for, temporary gratification, and his normal person isn't there, and so he's on somebody else. So I think that the intensity of the previous sequence, I don't know, gives that kick in the ass a little bit of like a,
Yeah, and the way he
zestiness.
looks, it almost, dead inside in the panel before it. The eyes are pure white.
He has little horns.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This guy here.
Oh.
I don't know who that is, but he feels so real as well.
He's seen that guy around town. That guy's not made up out of his head.
This one to me feels like he had a photograph for some reason compared to all his other characters. That feels photographically referenced.
There were two. So allegedly, what has been said in interviews is that there's no photographic reference used. I think this image right here and the first one of Ray and the head of the second chapter are the two ones that jumped out at me as like, oh, so somebody's drawn this directly from life.
Mhm.
The Ray header image where he's looking the opposite direction.
This
yeah. I don't know
that
if
I
it's
can see it as made up.
well, yeah. I mean, maybe it's the angle of the neck and the implication of the spine, and how that's not like, it's not obvious in the underdrawing. The
The
underdrawing isn't
bend of
there, but
the bend of the buttons.
yes, the perfection of that right there that is not a normal thing that somebody can carry around in their head, is my estimation.
It looks
Yeah,
like
but he's not normal.
yeah.
Like he
Right.
is a genius. I wouldn't be surprised if there isn't. But going back to that guy in the hat, though, I
Yeah.
will say, like, he had those forearm muscles. You don't see him delineating that stuff very often,
Right.
right?
The-
It's
yeah.
just
There's details in there that I don't normally see him get that suggest to me there was something like kind of compelling him. Like, he saw it in the reference material and like, just, okay, I got to do that, like without thinking about it. It feels like he's driven a little bit more by something exterior.
Mhm.
I don't know, something about that, but I love the guy. But he feels this like a sticker from the real world put into. That's what it feels like to me.
yeah.
It's weird.
I love it. He stopped me through this section here, and I took a little bit more time with that.
I love
Yeah,
Maggie's gesturing in the next panel too, with her
Yeah.
hands up like that.
Hands up. That's great.
Yeah, but that just feels like a guy who knows what he's doing in terms of cartooning. It's almost like this guy's too stiff. He's not fluid
Yeah.
enough. Like, I don't know. Anyways, this vacuuming.
Well,
this
there's
is
something
great.
else that you would if you were doing a comic for Marvel and DC or anything like that, you wouldn't even include that guy.
No.
Right.
And if you did include a guy like that, he certainly wouldn't be the most prominent thing in the panel in the front, right? Some guy you'll never see again.
Unless you're planning on bringing him back for the cover two issues later, and then somebody you've got a back end deal with the guy at the Overstreet Price Guide
First appearance. Yeah.
cameo.
Sell that page.
And I love him drawing Speedy lying, or Ray lying on the couch there. It's hard to draw a figure just lying down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It always looks great. Some new mark making on the couch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that feels very much like Gilberto.
Yeah, for sure.
Got an intensifying of the interpersonal conflicts here.
Oh, and this one I found really interesting. He's going in for a hug, but the hand, and she's screaming out because she stepped on something. It looks like he's slapping her.
Oh, yeah.
And I found that one to be, I don't think he intended that one.
No, that, I never noticed it that way. He's definitely like, it's open arms. Yeah, but that's interesting.
I read it as a slap, and I think that one's actually a compositional misstep.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I just look like that, boom, she's getting slapped.
Yeah.
But also, even just setting that moment up, going back to that one we all liked of her turning her foot here, like that she's always walking around bare feet.
Mm-hmm.
Right. She's actually stubbed her toes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
she's
then-
had that problem before, of like stepping on stuff.
She's so Esther's come back despite the fact that they're having this gang boss that has been involved with her is now having conflict with her current, boyfriend or whatever you want to call him.
Well, she's like playing two guys, right? Like she's visiting from out of town, and the gang boss guy is her boyfriend, but she's been seeing Speedy while she's from out of town, and she's saying she broke up with him, but he doesn't really seem to think so.
And who Maggie, her sister, has been like has had a secret crush on for years.
And this scene here where Maggie goes and like takes the beating, and her pulling on the door. Oh, that's a great drawing.
So great. And again, that's Archie Comics.
Archie Comics, yeah.
But it's like one of the most dramatic moments of the story. And that weird irony, or whatever you would call it, of the two things, playing off each other, these two opposites playing off each other, is one of the things that just made it seem so sophisticated.
And I love this mirror too. It looks like a whole city.
Yeah.
Totally wild abstractions.
That's a nice observed detail turned into cartooning land too. Those terrible mirrors that are in that style bathroom, where that's basically the cheapest mirror you can possibly get, and so that only gives you a vague reflection of what it is that you're actually seeing, and so you're seeing the banding of the image on the mirror.
Of the stalls. Yeah,
exactly, vertical dissolve.
I don't like this drawing. This guy feels out of place to me. I don't know
the guy in the crash. Are we looking at?
Yeah, in the bushes. I guess he's on the bushes. I don't know.
Oh yeah, but right. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah,
I gotta find something I don't like.
You know what? I'm rethinking this whole thing. Forget it.
Right.
Yeah,
go look up
fuck the guy gardening.
Dear Jaime.
I've humanized you. I'm not so terrified. That's what it is. It's just I need to find one thing.
Well, frankly, that's true, right? I mean, there's and you got to learn from the things that maybe don't even, identifying something that maybe doesn't work in the work of some genius is no slight. You know what I mean? it would be unnatural if someone did something that was perfect 100% of the time. The flaws make it human and bring in some warmth sometimes.
Yeah, we occasionally give a caveat along these lines, but I'm going to say it right now. Anytime we say something negative about something like this, worth remembering that Jaime Hernandez could have redrawn these 60 pages immediately after having drawn them before, and probably would have made changes to it. But that's not how comics work. You do one story and then you go on to the next thing, and that's just how it is.
That's the beauty of it. It's like baseball, right?
That's right.
Put yesterday's game out of your mind and you just keep moving.
It is like baseball. That's a much better analogy than the one that I've been cultivating.
Well, I stole that from Dave.
Oh, okay.
That's from the Cerebus thing,
yeah. Mine involves a giant shark and a robot. It's a little complicated.
Convoluted.
Yeah. So we get some more menacing things here. I don't know about you guys. I found the flies on the ceiling, and killing the flies on the ceiling to be fairly menacing counterpoint to the escalating tensions.
Yeah, and it's Izzy who's always presented as the kind of crazy prognosticator. But this panel right here, he cribbed this shit, I think. This looks like an Alex Raymond or Leonard Starr panel to me. I don't know. Like, that feels so from that era of having spent so many of my last few years in that. Like the hair and I don't know, that one is very, I never hear them talk about those guys, but their composition is so related.
The other guy that I don't, maybe other people talk about, but was it Patrick Nagel or whatever, that 80s illustrator?
Yeah, Nagel. Yeah.
How did that influence go? I don't know when Nagel started.
Nagel started in the late 70s.
So he must have had some influence from him then, right?
That's a very interesting idea. Yeah, I had to do a fake Nagel fairly recently, which was a lot of fun. Nagel, if you guys don't know, if you've ever been into a hair salon and you're approximately the age of the rest of us, you've seen third generation Nagels.
It is really weird how I'll pull up a Patrick Nagel real quick. Everyone's seen Patrick. I used to really love, but I should take that back. I still do really love Patrick Nagel. There
we go.
Yeah, his stuff.
The horse. Oh, give me that horse and the lady. Oh, that's the stuff. Right there.
Yeah, I love Patrick Nagel. Love the colors, love everything about it. Always have. I told that to one of my community college professors, and he was like, Nagel's awful. He's like the best artist ever at turning women into furniture.
Well, he could be wrong. He could be right and wrong, right? I mean, that's definitely, yeah. It's interesting. Nagel did like those are acrylic paintings, by the way. Those are not. You would look at it and you would think that those are like lithographic, screen prints or something like that. But no, those are acrylics. Which is interesting.
But it's interesting to bring him up too, because no one would ever accuse Jaime of turning anyone into furniture.
No, they are living beings. Yeah.
Even though he's got that, I keep going back to it, but that austerity of line.
Yeah.
they're alive, and they
That is a
grow and
very,
they age and they put on weight. And
yeah, that's a very interesting thing. Yeah, so we get the conflict that everybody's finally been waiting for here. Blaze of glory, and hey, any of you vatos Speedy? Shit, I'm Speedy, man. What the fuck do you want? Wait, Litos, I got a message from Rojo. It gets shot acting like a show off.
So I found that interesting because it's a bait and switch. Like, you're like, oh, Speedy's not actually gonna die. Like, this other guy foolishly claims that he's Speedy, and that's the death of Speedy, right? Like, in terms of the other gang, as far as they're concerned, Speedy's dead now.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Right.
And
Yeah,
so
I definitely had some relief.
You're talking about like landing the emotion of like, oh, he's been telling you what's going to happen the whole time, and you're like, oh, okay, Speedy's not actually going to die.
Right. But by the way, this now I'm totally convinced of our hypothesis here. Apologies for anybody who's not. That picture of Ray there with the shadow cross, and then the halftone shadow across that on the other side, the two double lit, is like a perfect amalgamation of Raymond Pettibon and Patrick Nagel.
Yeah, you're right. That's the midpoint between those two.
Yeah. and one of my least favorite, like, I don't like that look either.
Really?
He starts coloring in too much. He's not relying on his clean lines. Like, he
I
moves
agree
off
with that one. Yeah.
That's not a Jaime Hernandez drawing. He's trying something else. That's like a Brian Michael Bendis when he was doing his own self-published stuff, like Jinx. This is another one that looked potentially traced off a photograph to me.
That guy got me my very first ever comic book deal. Brian Michael Bendis got me published by yes, isn't that weird? By Caliber Press.
His early stuff was great, but it had this like traced photograph, high contrast look to it, and it's mushy to me compared to his other all of his other art. This is mushy. This also feels cribbed. That doesn't feel like a Jaime Hernandez drawing. That feels cribbed from like an old Ben Casey strip or something like that.
I was wondering if some of the influence of that might have been did you know that oh my gosh, of all the people for me to blank my name on, survivor of a certain car crash with a certain Alex Raymond,
Stan Drake. This is very Stan Drake, the hair.
I'm worried about you, man.
You worried about me, the fact that I couldn't think of the name Stan Drake.
Yeah.
Can we cut this part out and we'll just use it for evidence of my mental decline?
Yeah. Someone should write a book about that. Oh, great.
We're washing that book from our brain now. It's like it's for the public to now consume and be obsessed with.
Right, it's your guys now.
By the way, if you haven't got a copy yet, get your copy of The Strange Death of Alex
Please
Raymond.
do. It's the best.
And learn about Stan Drake.
I admire you drawing yourself shirtless. Of all the beautiful work, that was where I was like, you know what, that's guts.
You had to be honest in those moments. Yeah,
you got to do it. It's great. Beautifully drawn.
This panel right here really reminds me of Stan Drake, and I was just thinking about how Stan Drake had a series that was out in the early 80s. This was one of the last major things that he did, which was beautifully drawn and actually beautifully watercolored. And was just wondering if some of that compositionally might have been an influence.
Are you talking about Kelly Jones?
Yeah, Kelly Jones.
Or Kelly Green, rather.
Kelly Green.
Yeah.
Luckily, since we're talking about it, Classic Comics Press did a non-colored version of it.
Wow.
Oh, interesting. Huh.
You guys haven't seen this?
No, the color ones.
The
color is gorgeous. I'm not really sure. Okay,
well, because Stan Drake, man, get that color off my Stan Drake and let me see that line work. Most of the reproduction is amazing as well. Stan Drake also someone who for the super realism that he does great cartooning.
Yes, for sure.
And really surprising, and a lot of the compositional a lot of the compositional tricks here you don't see it as much because he's actually composing on a full comic page, but normally a Stan Drake is just a strip like that, and that same like play set composition that him
Right.
But especially Leonard Jones, I'm just really surprised that I don't ever hear. I mean, not that I've watched a ton of Hernandez brothers interviews, but it's always Archie and those guys. I don't ever hear them talk about the strip.
I wonder
artists.
if that could be a backdoor Stan Drake, Kelly Green, compositional influence there.
To me, it looks like this came out of an old strip. This is I could probably go through my Mary Perkins on Stage. That looks like a Leonard Starr to me. But this one, that lady, that's a Stan Drake to me.
Right.
So I don't know, because like, look at this. This is a Jaime Hernandez drawing, and this is a different. It's more realistic or something. I'm totally wrong. I could have just been, immersed in this shit for the last 6 years of my life and seen it.
And both of those panels that we're identifying have the extreme figure in the front and a middle ground figure and a background figure, and so that's the particular compositional tick that we're seeing there. And worth noting that is violating my thing that I was suggesting about the television 3-camera setup that he uses when the characters are sort of, it's just about the talking, because you wouldn't make a setup like this in a television film, because it'd be too complicated. Your frame is we would not have a moving reference inside of a static shot like that.
Yeah, right. You wouldn't register even really necessarily, right?
And anything in the foreground, any movement of that foreground is going to be so exaggerated and amplified on a smaller screen. It would be considered too extreme of a size change.
Well, you're right in that they never go like, except for that one shot of the guys walking up while he's on the ground. You never get worm's eye view, bird's eye view. It's always pretty like not necessarily eye level, but you're looking at the horizon line. You never really look up or down from the horizon line. And that's something that you get in the old strips too. Is very rarely do they go into a third point perspective.
Just also tying back to the pages. This is interesting. My version of it has that Litos being shot on a page turn, which according to the numbers on the bottom is actually wrong. It's different from what it would have been in the comic. It's the way you have it is correct. However, I really love it being on a page turn.
This says 11. Yeah.
Right. So it would normally, that's correct. It would be on the right side, right?
But not necessarily, because
because of the Gilbert stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And they don't number the pages like throughout the whole Love and Rockets book. They number them per little story, right?
I think so. Yeah.
So it, like, who knows? We'd have to go back to the original issue, but that makes way more sense on a page turn.
Yeah. It's great on a page turn. I mean, it's great there too, but.
So like not being able to see it coming, like anything could happen here. They could take the gun away or whatever. Here you kind of gestalt, you understand he's getting shot in the face.
Yeah.
This scene here too, where Ray and Maggie connect, and spoiler alert, if you haven't read Love and Rockets, I assume they get married, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're a couple. I don't know if they ever actually get married, but they end the Love Bungler story wraps basically this Maggie and Ray story up. I think he did it about 10 years ago. And there's flashbacks all the way back to Maggie and Ray's infancy, and it ties their story and Hopi's story together, and it's beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
But here, like this moment where she's confiding and like there's blood all over him, and then his face when she's like, Speedy, and realizing he's still alive, and just the absolute like dejection there is. Yeah.
Oh, it's so great. One thing I didn't really get, Maggie has black eyes from being beaten up. I got that only from an interview that he said once. I actually kind of thought maybe she was crying or something like that.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, that's because she had been beaten up in the bathroom.
Yeah.
And then here going
further out here would have made it more obvious that it's not a shadow or a dip in the face or something.
Yeah.
Push it out to the outside of the face.
And then this,
I'm going to time travel back to 1986 and make that
add a
suggestion.
bump. This like almost manga chibi, overly expressive.
That's
Maggie
obviously
face.
manga, right? And this
Yeah.
was again, what manga was even being. There was very little manga in America. There was like Barefoot Gen. There would have been the Eclipse stuff had just started, like My the Psychic Girl or whatever, Ranma
Right.
1/2. And
Fred
then like
Schott's manga had come out 2 years before, so he might have been able to look at that. Matt. Well, then there's all the Matthew Sweet wave of like Outlanders, and is that like 88 and 89?
I think that's later. No.
Yeah. Joe Manabe. We're gonna have to look at that sometime, Carson. I think that you would have a field day.
Wait, I do. I don't want to have this go out into the world without me clearly saying that I do know 1989 Girlfriend, Matthew Sweet. I would have been horrible. I would have lived my whole life going, people don't think I know when Girlfriend came out. Wow.
And I have no idea what you're talking about. So I need to read that.
Matthew Sweet dances with Lum.
That's right.
In a video, Matthew Sweet had a tattoo of Lum.
Yeah.
Rumiko Takahashi character from Yurusei Yatsura, which has never been translated all the way, I don't think, which is one of the funniest comics I've ever read. I mean, it's just quite amazing. I don't even think I could manage to describe it, but Matthew Sweet was popular, for a while, and like all good popular semi-celebrities, used his semi-celebrity to promote other people. And he wrote like a one-page introduction to Outlanders, which was published by Dark Horse in '89. Just a really good, early Studio Proteus translation, and other really good stuff. He's great. If you guys don't listen to Matthew Sweet, get it first. The albums that Richard Lloyd from television is playing the lead guitar on.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Yeah.
And actually now I'm thinking it was 90. So this whole Matthew Sweet thing, it's just been a debacle for me. I'll have to just hear from.
Let's just remind everyone that I wasn't able to remember the name of Stan Drake.
Yeah. Well, it's okay, because I don't even know who you're talking about. You just spoke like a bunch of foreign language, so we'll have to do an Educate Carson episode on that one for sure.
Are you saying that if I sang "Back in the Arms of a Good Friend," that doesn't mean anything to you?
Nah.
Wow.
Like you got to understand, like, even though I was born in 81, my awareness of pop culture, because I didn't ever have a TV. I grew up without a TV.
Oh,
my parents, not that we couldn't afford one, they just didn't want it in the house. They wanted to like spend time, like my dad reading to me rather than having a TV or something like that. So obvious why I enjoy comics so much, but
gotta go the other way.
My awareness of any kind of pop culture starts with like Green Day in terms of music.
Will you back up one page, Carson?
Yeah.
So
I guess Michael Jackson, but he was so overwhelming.
So this right here, we have the basically, the chibi figure that we were referencing in the bottom there is the culmination of the fight between Maggie and Speedy. And basically, it looks like Speedy is on the verge of coming to the conclusion that like, oh, here's this person for me. But basically, seems to me anyway, that he's realizing that basically everybody that he's fucked over, and having a sort of ultimate interaction with the things that he's done. I mean, yeah, I don't know.
I think he's having a moment of sincerity because he sees what's happened. But Boy Who Cried Wolf, she can't. The one time he's sincere, she can't accept it because he's caused havoc.
Right.
And he has those dead eyes again in that last tear, haunted. I guess eyes.
So
really.
white.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he says, "I've just about fucked over everybody that meant anything to me. You're all I've got left." But like, is that sincerity or is that a narcissist manipulator?
Yeah. Well, he lets you think. To me, I think in this moment is sincere because of the way he's drawn. He's sweating. He has those eyes. But obviously, Maggie thinks no. He's just
Right.
manipulating her again. That middle panel with her head on his chest, like
Yeah.
I think top right, panel and middle left panel, those are like pop art, Liechtenstein type romance style comic pages or panels, right? You can feel, but that middle one, just, I've never seen a comic like that. I mean, that just, or a panel like that in a comic, it's just seems so vulnerable and real.
Well, and putting the two like kind of kitsch cliche images right before that, like they don't really have real emotional resonance.
Right.
They're just kind of like cultural icons of,
Well,
yeah, those are cribbed too. He probably cribbed those straight from
except
purposely cribbed them.
Except they're not actually kissing. He thinks they're going to kiss, or he thinks that might be where it's heading. She's just relieved that he's alive.
Right.
She's relieved that like this mayhem hasn't ended with everybody dead, and he thinks that this is going to be their moment. But he's not able to bridge the gap because he's burned it down.
She's already pulling away by that second tier first panel. She has her fingers up on his shoulder and is pushing back.
But the sincerity of emotion in this panel lands even more because he preloaded. He could have kept his standard camera angle stuff here, but all of a sudden you do get like a kind of bird's eye view look down on him. And because he throws you two cliches, even though he's modified them, he's still throwing you two cliches that are like, bubble gum, and then you get the reality. Also, it's nice to see in her, even though she's younger, in her dejected state, that looks like how he draws older Maggie.
Yeah,
a little bit.
Well, she's got the fold underneath her chin as she's leaning down. That's another really well observed detail there.
Yeah. So that lands even harder because it's like, here's some real food all of a sudden.
For sure.
Super smart. So I really like the end here. Like, she gets mad at him and then where he's just like, I don't know, he looks almost evil here.
He just can't, there's nothing he can do to respond to this. He's totally closed out, and he's closed himself off from everything else. He's got
he's made the decision that this is the end.
And then we've got this this cross appearing from the illumination of the window.
I caught that. Yeah, that makes so much sense.
We've got the moment of decision paired with the image of sacrifice.
Did he do it? Is that him in the car?
Well, it's him in the car, but I assume because but we don't know if he did it himself or if the other
let's read the last of the dialogue.
You don't even know if that's him in the car because that's just his car. That's the Ortiz.
Yeah, I guess I'm just going by knowing later stories, but I guess he could have faked it.
Is it cleared up in later stories that he did actually commit suicide?
Yeah. Well, I don't know that they ever say suicide, but he's definitely dead. So to me, the question was, did the Dairytown gang realize they got the wrong guy and got him, or did he just go kill himself? And I tend to think he just killed himself because of the next page.
Right.
Which is this magical realism thing.
But if it's not magical realism, he literally comes and visits his sister and then just pieces out.
Yeah.
Or she just has a dream and hallucinates. So I like just reading this. Well, we can go through this, and then the next page puts another little like ambiguous stamp on it for me, I think.
Yeah. So we have the cops pulling in. Once again, the trick with the extreme foreground and the middle ground in the background. Isn't that Ortiz kid's car? Yeah. What's he up to so late? Should I say so early? Say, buddy, you can't park here. Come on, let's go. Move it, Bato. Oh, geez,
and he
Jerry
says Bato instead of Bato.
I think that was a mistake. And then I think having the little, definition thing at the bottom, I think this is like the one moment you don't need to have a footnote.
That's a weird mistake to make, though, because you're writing it by hand, but that's what would happen if you were typing and you miss the V and you hit the B.
Right.
No,
well, I mean, he was
storytelling mistake.
Yeah, storytelling mistake. I mean, I think it should have just gone. Just have him say Vato.
Right.
Don't
Okay.
go to the next panel.
Yeah.
Rather than have him the cops mispronouncing it. I guess almost as like a slander. Like
Right.
making fun of guys.
And it's
just unnecessarily confuses it.
oh, geez, Jerry, get on the radio. What's up?
Yeah.
So we don't actually see the interior of the car.
No confirmation it's actually Speedy. You kind of close that there's someone dead in there, maybe, but like, who knows? It could be like a dead pig, like, and
Maybe
then
he Huck Finned it. He faked his death and took off down the Mississippi.
yeah, like who knows what's going on there.
I think the title is suggestive of the eventual outcome.
Yeah, but he already red herringed you on the title.
Yeah.
And if this guy is actually a manipulator, like, who's to say he's not just going to go start over somewhere else? Like, I think he left it kind of open. It's pretty strong, but and then he comes to Izzy's house. Hey, Izzy, wake up. Huh? What? They show the dude that they show Esther. They show the dude that got shot in the eye, and then you go to Izzy. Yeah, but there's like a shadow, so it's like he's visiting all of them. Oh no,
Right.
his hand's there.
Mhm.
So he's grabbing all their hands, and then he goes, wake up, Izzy. Speedy, what are you doing here? Shh, it's okay. I just wanted to tell you that everything's going to be all right from now on and not to worry about me. Speedy, this is crazy. You know what time it is? Hold on a minute. Let me open the shade. And then when she opens the light, he's gone. So it's implied kind of that it's, the magical realism, the ghosts go visits them, but there's no reason why that can't be him physically. And in the moment she turns to get the shade, he's like, he pieces out.
In this hypothesis, is he Batman? She turns away and he's like gone.
Yeah, but I'm saying, like, comics allow for that a little bit.
No,
and
it is intentionally in many ways left open. I mean, I do agree with that. I mean, I'm team dead Speedy, but
I found this whole ending sequence to be really moving, and it's interesting how the pace changes so much. All of a sudden, each of these panels has its own kind of gravity and weight, and each one is like a large moment.
And then this last page is a flashback to when they're in high school. And then they say why they call him Speedy, right? Hey, Speedy, where are you going? Where was it? There was something in this page that suggested to me that he's a runner. Oh yeah. Little brother, I swear all those guys ever do is run. So that to me kind of suggested that
you're blowing my mind, man.
He didn't kill himself. He ran. He's a runner, and that's why he's called Speedy. And that's what that flashback scene is about.
You know what? All right. I'm not, I mean, I think it's a really interesting take. I think we need to start a podcast, Speedy Truthers, find out what happened. Yeah.
He's in the background at a concert somewhere in a future episode. That would be sick.
That would be amazing. I love it. I love the openness and the poetry of the ending. I think it's really powerful. Just beautiful stuff. It's just a beautiful story. I mean, and you could recreate the panels, you could try to learn the tricks, but there is some level of magic to it that is inaccessible, I think, to us mere mortals.
Yeah. And I think you're referencing to the timeliness and how it develops over time, and how you're following these characters in real time as you're reading them is probably a big part of that magic as well. Who knew that we would talk about Jaime Hernandez and we'd end up talking about Frank King, Gasoline Alley, for better or for worse,
Matthew Sweet,
and Patrick Nagel.
Yeah.
But Jimmy, thank you so much for bringing this comic bringing it back to our attention. And
thank you so much for having me. And I loved going through it with you guys. And again, congratulations on the Strange Death of Alex Raymond. It's, the book of the year. Just a masterpiece and a beautifully designed thing. So congratulations for that.
Thank you so much for that. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and I hope that you guys will all go out and pick up all of Jimmy's books, available from fine retailers right now. Only new. There are no used copies of anything anywhere.
It's got to buy them new.
Yeah, you got to buy them new.
You actually sign a contract that says that you will take it and you will only give it to your grandchildren after you are done with the book.
Exactly. That's just the rules I have. I have a very
right.
And when your next book gets ready to drop, come back and we'd love to
absolutely
do an in-depth on that.
I would love to hang out with you guys anytime. So thank you so much.
Well, thanks so much, Jimmy.